Okay, hello everyone. Looks like we're all in the Coachella Valley today. Oh, almost all. Corinne is here. Um, Weather is nice, life is gentle, except for I do want to remind us that the war continues. The hostages are still not free. The death and the destruction in Gaza continues, as it does in the West Bank. There are more victims of terror attacks on the Israeli Jewish side.
Did you clean? Yeah.
And hopefully we'll get some good news in the next few days about a ceasefire deal. Also want to remind everyone that we try every Tuesday to offer a glimmer of hope with an organization perhaps many of you have not heard of before, each time a different one. And I encourage you to click on the links to learn more about these organizations. This is not necessarily for me to urge your support of those organizations. It's really to urge you to know about them. And especially in times when things seem to be darker and what will be further down the line, I think this, for me at least, these are glimmers of hope for what might be. I don't think in the next few years, but certainly down the line. We had a wonderful walk in San Andreas in the Andreas Trail in the Indian Canyons. A little bit more difficult than I had described it would be, but I think we learned a lot, and we had a guest speaker, a guest guide, who I would imagine will be with us again next year doing something about Torah and nature. So thank you to everybody that came to that. We've just announced that we'll be doing a Saturday night Purim event at Gray. Yeah, I know not everybody likes Gray, feels it's small, but it is for free, it is intimate, and it eases quite a bit the logistics of having to provide for hot drinks, at least. We'll have some Hamantaschen. It will be a sober celebration, mostly because the Gray does not have a liquor license, and even though she would be all right if we brought it in, I don't want to endanger that in any way. And also we can have a good time. It'll be a little bit different because we are at war, and we are yeah, we'll do some study, we'll do a little reading from some of the Megillah, and we'll find our own unique way of celebrating as we do in these times. Okay, the first part of the book of Joshua was about the conquest. Second part, which we already started last week or the week before, is about the Nachalah, about dividing up the land, the settlement of the land. And today we have a kind of a strange story, strange in that going forward, we're going to learn about first the tribe of Judah and the tribes of Joseph. So that in itself is interesting because they get put to the beginning of the list of the settlement, as opposed to other possible orders of the tribes and other orders of the tribes, and the breakdown of the land that we find in the book of Numbers. Again, lots could be done if we would sit down with tables and actually compare Joshua and Numbers, or parts of Deuteronomy, or parts of Judges, or Chronicles. It could be fascinating for those who are interested in geography and trying to trace the different traditions of who's who and who's telling the story. Obviously, when it's your folks telling the story, your folks' ancestors are going to look more important than the others, and I think that's what's happened here with the tribes of Judah and Joseph, the two tribes of Joseph going forward. But that's more for next week. This week, it's of Judah, a particular element in Judah, and we will actually compare some text between Joshua and Numbers today. It's a short chapter, but it is kind of unique in the way that the book of Joshua is laid out. Remember, the war is over. Joshua is already an older man. He's in his 80s, maybe I forgot exactly. Yeah, maybe in early 90s already. I don't know, I forgot. But he's an old man. And this particular scene comes up. Unless somebody had a question or a comment about what we did until now. Right. Okay. So Sid, you want to read for us 1 through 5, please?
And these are the allotments of the Israelites in the land of Canaan that were apportioned to them by the priest Eleazar, by Joshua son of Nun, and by the family heads of the Israelite tribes, the portions that fell to them by lot, as God has commanded through Moses for the 9.5 tribes. For the portions of the other 2.5 tribes have been assigned to them by Moses on the other side of the Jordan. He had not assigned any portion among them to the Levites, for whereas the descendants of Joseph had constituted 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim, the Levites were assigned no share in the land, but only some towns to live in, with the pastures for their livestock and cattle, just as God had commanded Moses. So the Israelites did when they apportioned the land.
Right. To remind you, last week we had the 2.5 tribes that were apportioned land on the eastern side of the Jordan, and that was the and that comes first in the list because that's that chronologically that happened. Moses already kind of paved the way for that, so that makes sense for those 2.5 tribes to come first in the text. Then comes this
tribes that were on the right side of the Jordan.
So Reuven and
Reuven.
Gad and half of the tribe of Manasseh.
Oh,
Okay, so the other half of Manasseh is mentioned here with Ephraim, and because they're not the original 12, right? It's Joseph is divided into 2,
right.
and also the Levites are mentioned here because they're an exception that they don't have land. Now we've seen this at least twice in the book of Joshua already.
Never had land.
Right, and the text continues this. What Koifman in his commentary points out that this is a relatively this section of Joshua depends more than others on priestly sources, and that might explain why once again Levi is mentioned here, because this is from the annals of this was the document that was stored amongst the priests. Who knows, maybe a priestly writer and editor, but we see that time and time again, which is probably a Levitical / a priestly scribe wanting to remind everybody we're not in the land, not because we're not important, but because we have a special status. Okay, so that's that opens this particular part. But now we have a specific, unique kind of a case amongst the tribe of Judah. So, Dan, you want to read this for us?
Okay. The Judahites approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Yefuneh the Kenizzite, said to him, "You know what instructions God gave at Kadesh Barnea to Moses, the agent of God, concerning you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of God, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I gave him a forthright report. While my companions who went up with me took the heart out of the people, I was loyal to the eternal God, to my eternal God. On that day, Moses promised an oath. The land on which your foot trod shall be a portion for you and your descendants forever, because you are loyal to my eternal God. Now, God has preserved me, as promised. It's 45 years since God made this promise to Moses when Israel was journeying through the wilderness. And here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as on the day that Moses sent me. My strength is the same now as it was then for battle and for activity. So assign to me this hill country as God promised on that day. Though you too heard on that day that the Anakites are there and great fortified cities, if only God is with me, I will dispossess them as God promised."
What are your impressions, Dan? What are you getting out of this section? Because you know a lot about what the other section in the Torah that this connects with, we'll go to afterwards.
Well, of course, one thing, and I'm surprised I catch in this and the previous section is there's a lot about counting.
Oh,
That aside, okay, Caleb's asserting his rights vigorously, and the willingness. I'm also
seems like
struck by
you-
the willingness to fight.
Yeah, first of all, willing to fight as an 85-year-old, which leads us to believe that in the storyteller, the way the story is being told, is that section still isn't conquered. It still has the Anakites there, right? So it still needs to be, but instead of just demanding special treatment, which he's demanding special treatment, and he kind of makes up a story about how that particular piece of land was promised to him. We're going to go back and look at the section from
Right.
Numbers in a second, and I'll fill in what's missing from there. But the special relationship that he has with it, to me, doesn't it stand out though when he tells the story, other than in the beginning when he says, concerning you and me in the third line, but
mhm.
afterwards it's I.
Mhm.
He's not
I think it's
Josh-
propaganda,
propaganda meaning.
meaning that very noticeably he leaves out Caleb. And it was Joshua, it was really Caleb who brought back the good report, because if we look at Numbers, there's two conflicting traditions about who actually brought back the report. But if we say it was Joshua and Caleb, and really it was probably really just Caleb, why did he leave him out?
Why did who leave who? Why did he leave Joshua?
Why did Joshua leave his Caleb out? So it makes me think it's Joshua's propaganda.
Okay, but when you say why did Joshua, who are you mean the book of Joshua? Because
Oh, in this report, it says that I was when my companions, I was 45 years old when Moses, the servant of God, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land. Well, he didn't send just him, he sent 10, 12, 11 others, right?
right, but who's speaking here, in your opinion?
Yehuda.
You're right. This is
Oh, okay. That,
Caleb is
then why
Caleb is
did he,
speaking,
right,
not Joshua.
that's right. So why
And
did
so-
he leave out Caleb?
Well, that's my question. Yes, Ella.
Didn't the report by the Meraglim, by the spies, the people who were sent by Moses come in, and one of them said that it was very, very difficult, and it was Muvutsar, surrounded by walls, and it was difficult to get in, and he gave a pretty bad report. Now Judah gets up and he says, well, I can do it. I can conquer them. I have no problem at all.
Okay, so we'll go back into a second, and we'll get to that in a second, Ella, with the quote from Numbers. It tells that story, but also this is the representative of Yehuda, not Yehuda himself, right? It's Caleb ben Yefuneh. There's an interesting thing by why is his father called a Kenizite, a Knizi? That may reflect a people, Knizi, who are connected really to Esav, Esav, a time when Yaakov and Esav were getting along better than the narratives that we have. That's an interesting thing to itself. We don't have a lot of material we could base any opinion on, but it's an interesting thing that he's not just from the tribe of Judah. There's also some other part of him in there. But Caleb's main point, as Dan said, is that I can still fight, right? I'm older, I still fight, but he's also, and that's my piece. I get that piece. And we'll see, we don't have other people coming forward to say, I get that piece, right? They get the piece according to the lots, which were drawn, which was mentioned in the first paragraph, right? So what's the reason he gets that piece? Is it because the lot gave him that piece, the lottery, or because he came back with a good report? It seems like there's two competing traditions here, and what he's talking about here is because he gets special treatment because of his behavior. And my question was beforehand, and which Malka brought up here, is that it leaves Joshua out of the story, because even though he says you and me there, that was probably added, and we'll see in a second what we have to say, which we've mentioned before when we've studied Numbers. Okay, I understand, a little confusing, a little complicated, a particular area. And let's see in detail the area now. Roberta, why don't you read 13 to 15 for us? And we'll get back to this, don't worry.
So Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and assigned Hebron to him as his portion. Thus Hebron became the portion of Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and it is still it as it still is, because he was loyal to the eternal God of Israel. The name of Hebron was formerly Kiriath Arba. Arba was the great man among the Anakites, and the land had rest from war.
Okay. So the particular place is mentioned. This place, every time it's mentioned, there's almost always a connection with its history and what it was. There, the Anakites, whether that's a name of a people who happen to be tall, or as became in Hebrew, very tall people, giants, are called Anakim. But whatever it is, that's in the background. That's in the prehistory of the place. It's a formidable place. It's mentioned in the. We're not going to do the whole story from the spies, but it's mentioned in that spies. You might remember, says they looked at us as if we were grasshoppers. Right? They're so tall that we were as if we were grasshoppers, and then it talks about the fact that Hebron. This is mentioned many times. Was also called, or was in the past called, Kiryat Arba. Kiryat is town, city. Kiryat is the construct form. Then Arba can mean, as it is translated here, Arba, the name of a person. It was the city of Arba. Others understand from this it was a confederacy of 4 different towns. Yes, Ella?
No, that's what I wanted to say was
Yeah,
4.
4 different towns, yeah. And fast forward to 20th century, you may know that one of the first focal points of the settlement movement, the Orthodox Zionist settlement movement, was around Hebron, and not being able to build it or inhabit Hebron, although there is a Jewish inhabitant there was certainly in the heart of Hebron, no longer as far as I know, but a large settlement city called Kiryat Arba is right outside of Hebron. Yes, Klaus?
I'm a bit confused. Did Caleb get what he wanted, or is Hebron a totally different area?
No, according to this, thus Hebron became the portion of Caleb, son of Jephunneh. What's left up in the air is we don't know. Are there still Anakites there that he needs to fight off? And the truth is, I didn't look. I don't remember if that's related to or not. Maybe somebody.
And Hebron is in that area.
Yeah, Hebron is in this. Yeah, Hebron is south of Jerusalem, and to this it's one of those places in the land of Israel that has had continuous inhabitants, continuous population, continuous living in. It's been a continuous settlement for thousands and thousands of years.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, it's where the cave of the double cave Marat HaMachpelah is, where the ancestors are said to be buried. It's where there's a mosque and a synagogue in the same building, the foundation of which is a Herodian building. The stones at the bottom of Marat HaMachpelah are very similar to the stones in the supporting wall that we know as the Western Wall, the Kotel HaMaravi. Those very large stones that have borders on them. Was one of Herod's many building projects in his quest to be immemorial, to be
Immortalized.
yeah, to immortalize himself, to self-immortalize, right? Building lots of landmarks and things that are still left, like Herodian, for instance, an entire mountain. So there's one phrase here, 3 words, that perhaps it's obvious by now because we've been studying together, many of us, for years. But when somebody comes to say, well, who wrote the book of Joshua, as the Talmud says? Well, Joshua wrote the book of Joshua, right? The last 8 verses of Deuteronomy, because that's when Moses dies, and the book of Joshua. Well, if Joshua wrote the book of Joshua, then how does one make sense of those last almost the last three words of the Hebrew. 13, ad hayom hazeh, as it still is. Right? So this is elementary biblical criticism stuff, right? It's these kinds of comments. Aza Kanani Ba'aretz, at that time the Canaanite was in the land, says the book of Genesis. What do you mean at that time? When it's supposed to be written, and they were in the land, right? It was Moses writing it. But those are the things that were telltale signs of someone writing this much later that were picked up upon by others, but most famously by Ibn Ezra and then Spinoza. And Spinoza, being kind of the father of modern biblical criticism, utilized these kinds of verses. I don't know if this one particular, but this is very much you can't say that it's contemporary with the times that it happened. And he goes good because it said and that as it's still is to this very day. You don't say to this very day if it's happening, if you're writing about something that's happening in your lifetime. Okay, comments or questions? Okay. So why don't we begin to read the section from Numbers 14? I'll just say Numbers 13 is the beginning of the story of the spies. I didn't want to bring the whole story. And you'll remember that God says to Moses, send spies, shlach lecha, send the spies. There's a difference in how the story is told between Deuteronomy and Numbers. The spies or those that are sent on a reconnaissance mission are 12 in number, one from each tribe. They go, they see the land, they come back. The 10 came back with a nasty report, and all the spies were in the area of Hebron, according to chapter 13, 22, 23, if you want to check afterwards. It's not here. All the spies were there. They came back, the majority came back with a negative report, and 2 of them came forward with a positive report. Let's look at this now, and then let's go back and talk about, was it 2 or was it 1? And so Malka, why don't you begin from the beginning of Numbers 14 that we have.
And Joshua son of Nun and Caleb son of Jehunah, all of those who had scouted the land, rent their clothes and exhorted the whole Israelite community. The land that we traversed and scouted is an exceedingly good land. If pleased with us, God will bring us into that land, a land that flows with milk and honey, and give it to us. Only you must not rebel against God. Have no fear then of the people of the country, for they are our prey. Their protection has departed from them, but God is with us. Have no fear of them.
Once again, this is a reaction to the negative and the fear-mongering that the other 10 representatives did, said they're going to tear us up alive. We shouldn't go in. I mean, it's a beautiful land, and we brought fruit back, these huge clusters of grapes to prove it, but we shouldn't do it. And that's why the reaction of the community is thus. Go ahead.
As the whole community threatened to pelt them with stones, the presence of God appeared in the tent of meeting to all the Israelites. And God said to Moses, how long will this people spurn me? And how long will they have no faith in me, despite all the signs that I have performed in their midst? I will strike them down with pestilence and disown them, and I will make of you a nation far more numerous than they.
Okay, and this is one of the numerous times where God is ready to do away with the people of Israel, and Moses comes in and defends them and calms God down, which is an interesting aspect of our theology, of biblical theology. We love it. But I bring the whole section here because let's remember that according to this tradition, the Israelites could have gone a few days, few weeks, and reached the land. But because they accepted this negative account, God declares upon them the 40 years of wandering. And it's so anticlimactic, maybe that's not the right word, it's disappointing, because this is the generation that saw the miracles, the 10 plagues and the splitting of the sea, and everything that God is going to speak of now going forward. Go ahead, Malka.
But Moses said to God, when the Egyptians from whose midst you brought up this people in your might hear the news, they will tell it to the inhabitants of that land. Now they have heard that you, O Eternal One, are in the midst of this people, that you, O Eternal One, appeared in plain sight, when your cloud rests over them, and when you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. If then you say, this people all at once, the nations who have heard your fame will say, it must be because God was powerless to bring that people into the land promised them on oath that he slaughtered them in the wilderness. Therefore, I pray, let my sovereign's forbearance be great, as you have declared, God, slow to anger and abounding in kindness, forgiving iniquity and transgression, yet not remitting all the punishment, but visiting the iniquity of parents upon children, upon the third and fourth generation. Pardon, I pray, the iniquity of this people according to your great kindness, as you have forgiven this people ever since Egypt. And God said, I pardon as you have asked. Nevertheless, as I live and as God's presence fills the whole world, none of those involved who have seen my presence and the signs that I have performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, and who have tried me these many times and have disobeyed me, shall they see the land that I promised on oath to their fathers. None of them who spurn me shall see it. But my servant Caleb, because he was imbued with a different spirit and remained loyal to me, him will I bring into the land that he entered, and his offspring shall hold it as a possession.
And what are you going to ask about this last part, Malka?
Where's Joshua?
Exactly.
Right.
And then I could say, but Joshua's at the beginning of the story, and Joshua son of Nun, Caleb ben Yefuneh. Most modern commentaries would say that part was added. At a later point, somebody said, yeah, how could you have this story without Joshua? But when you look at it and clearly, and you see it, at least that's the trend in modern critical scholarship, is that this is a story about Caleb ben Yefuneh, and this is a story which lifts up which tribe? Yehuda.
The Yehuda.
Right. This is the beginning or the continuation of the leadership of Yehuda, which becomes the house of David, and then represented by the Judean Judah and the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah, as opposed to the northern kingdom. And that competition goes on. Let's remember that the Tanakh that we have, by and large, certainly the historiographical literature that we have from Deuteronomy, or let's just say right now, from Deuteronomy to the end of Kings, is a Judean.
That's going on all the time till Israel finally is captured.
Say it again.
We have this conflict going on for years and years and years, and eventually till Israel is captured by the Assyrians, I believe, and Yehuda remains for a couple of years longer.
Right, the Assyrians, Ashur, right? The Assyrians who yes, that's part of it. That's in the, and again, we have the story told by the Judeans, not by the Assyrians so much. Excuse me, by the northern tribes. We do have some stories that are told by the northern tribes that have been woven into the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, the way we know it. For instance, the last part of the book of Genesis, in which it's not Judah. Judah is actually doesn't turn out well there so much. He's recognized as a leader, except for he goes off and has this, he sleeps with his daughter-in-law. True, he was tricked into it, whatever, and that's what brings us the house of David eventually, as the end of the book of Ruth points out on purpose. But by and large, that the end of the book of Genesis really lifts up the house of Joseph more, hence Ephraim and Manasseh. And so that competition is not clear cut. It's not like you're either for or you're against. It's the literature is mixed in, the traditions are mixed in with each other. But the tradition that we have here in the book of Joshua is very much a Judean tradition, perhaps in the language, the tradition of the priest, but still the prominence here goes to the tribe of Judah, because they get to choose exactly where they want to be. Let's also remember that David's first capital city was, before Jerusalem, what was it?
Hebron.
Hebron, right. So a lot of that stuff's going on here. But there's another interesting thing that I found. If you go back, turn back to the first page at the beginning of verse 6. Maybe Dan, you'll notice there's what, if you look in Hebrew. Reminiscent of anything? Vayigshu, Parshat Vayigash. Vayigash is what is, it's when Judah went to it. Now, it's not the only time it happens, but it's not all that common. And so this is the Zakovich, student of Zakovich in me, which definitely sees a connection between wanting us to remember how Judah showed his leadership when he finally had enough in that back and forth between him and Joseph before they knew Joseph was Joseph, the viceroy would be between them. And he shows his leadership by saying, enough is enough. We did this, we did this, and we did this. That's the Torah portion of Vayigash. And here it's the same tribe that comes forth in that same word to demand that which is theirs, to remind the text is reminding us with that word of the leadership of the tribe of Judah, and therefore they get that piece of land. And even though it seems it hasn't been conquered yet, still needs to be conquered. And so they have this superhero forefather who's 85 years old, he's still ready to go out to war, kind of a thing. Reactions or questions? A little bit complicated. I know it's not so linear today, but
I think this is classic in the Numbers 14:6 through 24. It seems a lot of classic Deuteronomistic language in it, Deuteronomic language in it. So it struck me about God, slow to anger, abounding in kindness, and forth reminding you of Shemot, right?
right.
So I did that. I think that probably gives it another clue that it's very late writing.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
But they constantly, I mean, God constantly reprimanded them. In later books, even in Kings, they all misbehaved and they had idols, and God was constantly after them.
Yeah, not even in Kings. I mean, actually, especially in Kings, because Kings ends with the destruction, and Kings and all this kind of writing. Ella, modern scholarship would say is, or at least Zakovich would say, this is all in order to explain why the temple was destroyed. Temple eventually was destroyed when this literature was being written after the destruction of the temple. It was not everything, right? Parts of Samuel and Kings, especially, yeah, Samuel and Kings. There's traditions that are earlier, but the way that we have those books now, the historiographic books of the what we call early prophets and the Nevi'im Harishonim, the whole point is to say, and that, boys and girls, is why the temple is destroyed, because we could never behave ourselves. Kept coming up and time and again, except for in this case, there's exceptions. Who could behave himself? Caleb, not so much Joshua. Who else could behave themselves? Well, David himself, even though the stories tell very differently, and certain kings like Yoshiyahu. But the majority, they could, yeah, they had a hard time. Yes, Ella.
No,
Oh, okay. Yes, Rita Claire.
I have a question. Can you clarify something for me? It says, as the whole community threatened to pelt them with stones. Okay, which community was going to pelt them with stones?
This is the hoi polloi, the mob who had just heard the 10 tribes report in a negative way. They shouldn't go on land, and then suddenly someone says, no. It's like, I don't want to make a comparison to what it is today, but look at how many movies and books and TV programs have the fear of the mob of the masses, and then one brave person says this, and they want to kill him for that, right? What is the story of Jesus, right? If not that kind of a story. One person is leading a small group of people to protest how things are going, and boom, that just seems common to so much literature. Does that clarify it for it, or are you're upset because they're going to pelt him with stones? I understand that, but
well, I just want to know who were the ones
the
that
Israelites
were
yeah.
going to pelt. Okay.
The mob of the Israelites who didn't they didn't want to hear somebody being optimistic.
Okay.
They didn't want it. That was not the message, because the other guys, they fed into their fear. Such a common occurrence in human history. So you become
So
angry at
they were going to pelt their own people with stones.
Yes, I know that sounds hard to believe that
Wow. Okay.
that there's such an argument amongst people that would pelt them with stones. Yeah, I mean, the only reason that many people don't pelt each other with stones in this country, Rita Claire, is they're afraid of getting sued or going to jail. I don't think it's because of the good of their heart. I think many people would be doing a lot more pelting. That's my impression. So what do people do? They pelt in social media. They pelt their
Yeah.
stones in social media. Yes, Richard.
Or they just use graffiti.
They pelt with their spray can.
Yeah.
Okay. Richard, have you been out again? Was that a
Well, I
hint?
spent the morning by the koi pond with Tammy.
Oh, you not graffitiing. I thought maybe you
I
were
wasn't
out.
graffitiing, no.
Okay, you're going because I pass by the graffiti on the overpass and the freeway, and I said that must be Richard who did that.
Yeah. Tagging. I've tagged my gang.
Tagging, right, tagging. You're the tag, Richard the tagger.
I
Okay.
didn't see as much as of that lately, quite honestly.
That's because Richard was injured. He's been at
Oh,
home.
because Richard was injured. That's right. That's right.
Next,
Okay, what else we got, folks?
Klaus and I are going to go on our tagging mission together.
And Susie Spicer as well.
Right. And Susie Spicer, yes.
Yeah, the three of you. Yeah, wonderful.
Hold the cans.
Okay. All right. So, it's a short chapter. Brought a relatively long piece from Numbers to see the conversation between these two texts. And you know me, I'm not into the chronology so much, but sometimes I just want to give Dan what he's yearning for. I want to give Dan that, he thirsts so much for this kind of thing. So I'm going to go back to Dan because I found these two passages in the Talmud that give Dan exactly what he's looking for. Go ahead.
Okay, you gotta tag me for something. Okay.
Look at Richard's the object of my derision most of the time. So sometimes
Okay. Okay, you want me to read this then? Okay.
Yes, please.
From where do we know that it took 7 years to conquer the land? As Caleb said to Joshua, 40 years old was I when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land. And now behold, I am this day 85 years old.
Yeah, now, can you work out that I should have? I did. You
Yeah.
probably.
I looked ahead.
Okay, but the math works out. How does the math work out?
Math works out. I think it is because after the time of the episode with the spies, I think the 40 years was the complete wandering. So from that point, it was 38 years.
Exactly.
And 38 and 7 is 45 plus 40 is 85. So the math works.
Right, everybody, do you see how his face is shining? You see that?
Say that again. I didn't catch it. all.
Okay. I was 40 years old
Mhm.
when he did the spying. Okay. So it was another 38 years they were wandering
Right,
because they were already 2 years into the wandering when this incident with the spies happened.
right.
So after at the end of the wandering, he was 40 plus 38 or 78 years old.
Right.
So now he's 85. So that means there were 7 years between the end of the wandering and the time of he's talking now.
Okay, Ella, you have a different cheshbon?
It's right. No.
Okay, Ella says it's right, so she must have checked with a calculator. Okay, or Richard checked it on QuickBooks. Okay, so, but I guess what I want to say is sometimes the Talmud, thank you, there, with the abacus, that, of course, finally the abacus. Yeah, sometimes you get these comments. It does concern, there's a early rabbinic, one of the earliest rabbinic works that we have is something called Seder Olam Rabbah. It's not a long text. It's not terribly interesting, but it's about biblical chronology. So there was a part of the rabbinic circles that really were into that. It had to make sense for them. Others, I like, were of my character or my relationship. Want to know what does it have to say this moment to me? But it's not one is right, one is wrong. There are different kinds of approaches, and so that's in the Talmud here, but also to emphasize the fact that although we took just a month or two 2 months, 3 months to read those chapters in Joshua, it took 7 years. It didn't happen boom, 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 which is the impression you might get if you were just reading through the book of Joshua. That's why this is important as well to restate. And then go ahead and read the second. Malka, are you
Oh,
raising your
no,
hand?
no, I was just stretching.
And read the second one, would you, Dan?
From where do we know that the tabernacle remained in Gilgal for 14 years? 7 years of the conquest and 7 years during which they divided it. As Caleb, son of Jephunneh, said to Joshua, 40 years old was I when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land. Okay, so it's what we just read again. So it's the same, looks like the same story and the same math. They're just adding in how long it took to divide up the land,
Right.
tagging it on.
And it gives us a forward looking that the Gilgal was the temporary resting place of the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And while it was resting there during the war, it will still rest there another 7 years. That's going forward. And the rest of the book of Joshua is really that period. Thank you, Sasha. It's really that period of the settlement of the Nachalat Haaretz. Yes, Ella.
Where geographically is Gilgal?
There's a few places that have been attributed to Gilgal, and there's two ways of understanding that. One is that nobody knows exactly, and they have different reasons for saying it. The other one is that there were a number of places called Gilgal because Gilgal essentially is like, I always think of Stonehenge, all those things around the world, those rings of stone, which seem to be very, very deeply human, part of the human experience, ritual experience to make a ring of stones. So, but let's say north of Jericho on the plains in the Jordan River Valley, I think most people would say. But I think if you look in Gilgal in the Encyclopedia Mikra'it, which I have and I didn't look, but mostly I don't look at it's the Biblical Encyclopedia, which is a classic work of reference, really good. But it's already old. It was just being finished maybe when I was a student, maybe the last volume. But then it was still up to date in the 80s, but that was a long time ago. But more than anything else, I don't go to it often because the letters are really small. Yeah. There's a number of entries for Gilgal. If you were to look in Encyclopedia Judaica, you'd probably also find multiple entries for places where you might have Gilgal, as you'll probably find on Wikipedia as well. By the way, I'll often suggest to people to look in Wikipedia for things because the theory of Wikipedia is that if many, many people go over and over and edit it from different ways, it will slowly refine itself. But I was looking at something yesterday, which was when I was answering Dan's email about a particular issue, and not only did I get nothing from it other than what I was pretty easy could do on my own for 20 minutes of research. Given I have those tools and Talmudic tools, but it just wasn't very helpful. It just wasn't. I think it all depends on how popular a particular topic is and how many people go over it. Sometimes I can get to an article in Wikipedia where it's clear by the style and the English that it's a kind of orthodox or ultra-orthodox English style writing about rabbis and things. It's a particular way of writing, different than say, Art Green's book about Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, which I'm slowly reading on Shabbat, which is telling a story of a Hasidic Rebbe, but with different language, different style. And so you can see sometimes and I don't go back to it, but you can go in Wikipedia, you can look and see the history of the editing, and I would imagine it would be just very few people, maybe one or two, as opposed to hundreds and thousands in larger articles. All right, this wasn't our topic today, but okay. But we finished the page and I have to fill the time. Or we could end early. Roberta, what do you have to say?
No, I don't know the history as well as most people here. So I'm listening and learning. I mean, it's complicated, and the layers of writing and who wrote what in what time confuse the issue. And it takes a scholar to unravel all of these threads that are woven in here. You know, the constant is listen to God and behave appropriately and follow him no matter what, or else. And there's a lot of or else.
Another point that I meant to make, and I began to make it, I want to reiterate, is that part of the fervor of Orthodox settlement groups or ideology in the West Bank, some of it comes from general being in the land of the ancestors, but the fervor around Hebron is because of the holy place there, and it was a holy place for thousands of years because of the grave of the patriarchs. Whether they're buried there or not, that's immaterial. That people, Orthodox Jews, believe that they are buried there. That's where they were. I would say I'm not even sure they lived, those people, but at least they, as symbols, are buried there. And a section like this, which shows again the centrality of Hebron more than other places that are talked about. And so you can imagine in 1967, when it was in Israel's hands, what the possibilities were to go back to that kind of a place. And that's other places, Shechem, outside of Shechem, Beit El, places that are famous in the Bible were very attractive to many of the settlers. And that's why there were established settlements were established in certain places. This was not the case with the Gaza Strip where we lived, because there is no biblical history of the Gaza Strip other than the fact that it was Philistine. And so that fervor wasn't there. And in fact, none of that religious Zionism and the fighting for it happened until Ariel Sharon instituted the pullback out of it, the evacuation of the Sinai. Then suddenly it became a major issue for religious Zionism. It wasn't. There were religious Zionists there. We were, but not the same kind that were in Hebron. And that changed because of the pullback. And that's why you hear today from some of the politicians, in particular, I'm thinking about the finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, who, by the way, is very young. He just turned 40 yesterday, I think. Was his birthday yesterday, the day before. That's not to say he's not able, not to say that he's unqualified for his job because of his age. I'm just mentioning that he's kind of a young guy. And didn't experience, he wasn't part of these things as they were unfurling in the 80s. But he called, as many have, to resettle Gaza now. Now's the opportunity, and there are thousands and thousands of Jews that feel this way, Israeli Jews. Thankfully, it's just thousands and not tens or hundreds of thousands. Certainly not tens or hundreds of thousands that are willing to do it. But with everything you have seen from the pictures from Gaza, because we see the pictures that Israelis don't see, not because they're censored by the government in Israel, but because, as I spoke on Shabbat, because that is the culture right now in Israel after the trauma of October 7th. Can you imagine Can anybody imagine resettling, bringing Moshavim back into the Gaza Strip? I guess people can. I was kind of asking this group here. So, as always, our study connects to Inyanei Yoma, matters of the day. Yes, Klaus.
I'm always surprised that Moses figures so prominently in assigning things in the land. After all, God says, I'm not going to let you in the land. You're going to look at it. But how was Moses so smart as to know pretty much what the eastern part and the western part, and make comments all along on these things?
All right, so your question is not so much about Moses. Your question is, this is how you want to say it, Klaus. Why did God bestow all that knowledge upon Moses?
Yeah.
Because remember, it's not that Moses is making this stuff up, or that he had a great geography teacher in Pharaoh's palace growing up, but it's because this is the text wants to, again, lift up Moses as the authority. Even if, in other words, it strengthens his class. Even though he wasn't going to go into the land, even though he didn't see the land, he's the authority upon which this story and other stories, that's how we got here, because Moses was the man who was with God.
I never realized that. It's interesting.
And it means, essentially, from a religio-political point of view, it means, and we get to be here because God said so.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yes, Sid.
I always wondered, the reason that Moses never got to go into Israel was because he committed some terrible sins. I don't know if I would call them terrible.
Right, so you want to rewrite the Torah, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. You and a lot of other people.
I said, that's, you know,
Yeah,
sounds like an excuse.
yeah, and as you'll remember as well, there's different traditions as to why. Is it because he hit the rock? Is it because he was just too old? He was part of the other generation. You know,
Well,
go ahead.
I think one of the reasons that Moses was part of the other generation, and he was more than 40, they were more than 40 years, so he was just too old to get in.
That could be part of it, or yeah.
And I think God wanted is a different leadership, somebody new.
I always remember the part that I think is in the Shabbat liturgy that makes me feel better about what happened with Moses is that instead of Moses getting a portion in the land, don't we say on Shabbat, Moses rejoiced in the gift of his portion, the diadem of glory God gave him on Mount Sinai?
Right,
So I think that Moses's gift and his portion of the land was that he got to give the Torah.
Yeah.
That makes me feel better.
Everybody has their own role.
Mhm.
Right. Somebody recently asked me, how come we don't have in Palm Springs? And I think essentially they were asking me, how come I have not organized a walk run for the hostages, which is apparently happening in other larger cities. And I chose not to answer it and to get involved in that conversation, but I think, and in another conversation with one of my colleagues yesterday was talking about the importance of a particular organization for students on campus and how come you don't, because we all have our roles to play. We have our roles that we choose for ourselves, what we're good at, what we feel is
Well,
most important.
I think that the rabbis in the area should confront the federation and should come out from the federation, because aren't they like an umbrella for the Jewish community here?
Well, they
mean,
like
this
to,
is
they
why-
like to think they are, but how does one, but what would you expect of the rabbis to do?
Well, speak to the federation and let the federation organize it.
Or organize what? Oh, that
As a
particular thing.
march or organize a run or organize something.
You know, this was for somebody from outside, from another city and another place, and I don't know. Yeah, well, but go ahead, please. I think, to me, my role is in a different place. As much as I feel for the hostages and their families, yeah. A lot of things could be done, but each of us will find our voice that we want to raise up. Okay. Thanks for being here. And see some of you tomorrow, once or twice. And did I, is something coming up that I need to announce? No, that's it. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.